Okay, I think there's been enough information. This looks like Mountain Dew, but I've already drunk the Mountain Dew and now I've filled it with water. There's been enough information presented to begin getting a picture, not only of the complexities, but of the problems, as well as the solutions, as well as the changes that archaeology and history of Mesoamerica, the Book of Mormon, the Old World, things are in flux. Things are moving. It's not a standstill. Archaeology doesn't come to the end of the road and say, ta-da, we're there, we know it all. Not even close. There's three other sources that I want to get to. One is by Hugh Nibley, and the other two are by John Sorensen. Of course, John Sorensen is the major Mesoamerican archaeologist, anthropologist who has done the most work on this subject. Hugh Nibley's analysis is basically from the Old World, but he is showing that this is in his text, Lehi in the Desert, the World of the Jaredites, and There Were Jaredites, put together by Farms. This is pages 214, 215, and 216. Nibley really has some interesting things to say about steel, the idea of steel. Meteoric iron was a primitive use in the Chalcolithic age of the pre-dynastic Egyptians, but they did use it. So he's finding the evidence in Egypt that they did use prehistoric iron. There's also materials in the Sumerians, as well as a Mesopotamian knife blade, which wasn't of meteoric origin. It was set in a handle, and it's been dated with certainty to the 28th century BC iron from the Great Pyramid Age. This is 2900 BC. So we have it in different countries. We have it up north in Mesopotamia, down south in Egypt as well. He's just showing this. The Egyptians specialized in it. Wainwright found himself discovering iron beads at Gerza in Egypt, and these date to 3500 BC and earlier. These were obviously worked. In fact, by 1000 BC, Egypt still keeps on in the Bronze Age. So he proved that the working of iron is as old as civilization. The Egyptians then go on to prove that civilization is perfectly free to ignore it. Now that's an interesting tack. Did that ever occur to any of the critics? Not at all. Why? Because they're not studying the scholars. This is interesting. They had the option of learning about metalwork and using metal, but they ignored it. This also occurred in Mesoamerica, but Nibley is showing it in Egypt. It was the Asiatics who really made the most use of iron. The Egyptians didn't do that, even though they had it available to them. See, this is another demonstration that the ancients don't think like we moderns do. We say, what a bunch of idiots. The more powerful civilization they could have had if they would have used it well, they weren't thinking in those terms, were they? They had it, but didn't use it. The Mesopotamians, however, they did use it. The Hittites used it. They even had entire thrones made of iron. So we have this anomaly that all of the neighbors have metal, but the Egyptians didn't use it. That's not proof they didn't have it, however. They just ignored it. Fascinating. Utterly fascinating. Oh, this is interesting. In the Amarna period, if we move further east into the region in which the Jaredites took their rise, this is interesting. We find the manufacture of iron so far advanced by the Amarna period that the local monarch can send to the king of Egypt 2 splendid daggers. These daggers are made of what they called kabal kinu. This word translates as steel. This is on page 215 of Nibley's text. Literary references to steel were very ancient. Were you aware of that? The Zendavesta refers constantly to steel, and steel comes before iron in the 4 ages of Zarathustra, reminding one of the Vedic doctrine that the heaven was created out of steel, and the steel was the sky blue metal of the earliest Egyptians and Babylonians. The legends of the tribes of Asia are full of iron and steel birds, arrows, and other magical articles, and the founder of the Seljuk dynasty of Iran was called Iron or Steel Bow. The working of iron is practiced in Central Asia even by primitive tribes. Marco Polo speaks of them as mining steel rather than iron, where steel may be taken to mean any form of very tough iron. Here again, the nomenclature between the metals, different metals, but it's all being translated as one word, steel. This issue is important in relation to steel as found in the Book of Mormon, isn't it? The correct chemical formula found in steel objects from Rosh Hashanah dates back to the 14th century B.C. If we would trace the stuff back to its origin and time and place of origin, we should in all probability find ourselves at home in the country of the Jaredites. Theirs was the land of Tubal-Cain, the far northwest corner of Mesopotamia, and Wainwright observed, when he approved of the account in Genesis 4:22, this is really interesting. The oldest land where we know stores of manufactured iron were kept and distributed to the world is Jaredite country, as Nibley has identified it. This is the oldest land that has iron. It is to this region and not to Egypt that we must look for the earliest as well as the best types of ancient ironwork, even though the Egyptians knew iron by 3500 BC at least. So this idea of steel in ether, that may not be an anachronism. That's fascinating. The evidence shows there is a plausibility that the Book of Mormon's not kidding. Now you're going to say, on the one hand, Hamblin says perhaps it is an anachronism that Mosiah translated that term. And now you're saying there really is evidence that steel was in the Jaredite country that early. Which one is it? We may not know. The point is, there's not just one plausible answer, but two. And in history and archaeology, as the scholars always remind us, we deal in plausibilities, probabilities. We don't have certainty yet. Believe me, no one would like to have certainty more than we LDS scholars. But we can't get there. Not yet. But the evidence is showing that it is rational, it is realistic, and it is very possible. This is another mistake Joseph Smith did not make. The example of iron, steel, and bronze is instructive here. They are not evolved by imperceptible degrees to conquer the world in steady progressive triumph through the ages, but they appear fully developed right from the beginning. The same applies to other products besides just steel or iron, and so on and so forth. So that's Nibley's analysis. Very important, interesting point of view from the old world that really does pack a punch for evidence supporting the very fact that the oldest book in the Book of Mormon, the Book of Ether, may very well be describing a realistic situation.